Do you think Lord of the Rings running concurrently with House of Dragon is going to end up hurting it? Just because of the immediate, like, for me, it's an immediate comparison. I jumped
Oh yeah.
basically right from seeing yesterday Lord of the Rings, today House of Dragons. Do you think they would be better served having that series run like in the spring, and then House of Dragon runs in the fall, they run in the spring, and then you've got some buffer in between the two, and so you're not as conscious of how good House of Dragons is, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it, and you can enjoy Lord of the Rings more on its own merits.
I'll tell you
Yeah.
what, as someone who inherently will say that I like the world of Game of Thrones more than the world of Lord of the Rings. Just
Hmm.
I just like the world more.
Sure.
There's nothing I want more than to be able to watch an episode of that Lord of the Rings show and say, "Holy shit, that was better than fucking House of the Dragon." Like, I want to see the show be that good because I just want another good show. And if I can have
Hmm.
another good show that is like high fantasies with fucking even more like Game of Thrones is not high fantasy. Like I've said this before, Game of Thrones puts the fantasy stuff in the back seat. It's all political drama. Like, and that's it's just real, right? Like again, I brought this kind of up before when we in when the first or second, whenever the orgy happened, I made the comparison like we're not going to see an orgy in Lord of the Rings. That's just not
Sure.
the kind of world that it is. We're not going to see
Sure.
all this. We're not going to see Damon or any character like Aragon's not going to walk out of the woods with a torso. Like that's just not the kind of world that that show is, right? And that's fine. I just want it to be good. But to your point, I don't know if it would be better or worse because I think the comparison will always be there
Yeah.
because it's entering the medium of television, and for the last 10 years Game of Thrones has been really the only show you could even consider to be like a high fantasy show that's even been on that I'm not going to say it's only been on, but that's at least been good. And to reach like a global phenomenon kind of thing, like that doesn't happen. Like
Yeah.
Game of Thrones was like lightning in a bottle just for how like good and successful it became, right? Because not everything becomes like a zeitgeist show. Not everything is a Stranger Things. Not everything is a Breaking Bad or a Soprano. Like that stuff doesn't happen. So, and that's part of why I always say like I preface anything when I talk about House of Dragon versus Game or versus Lord of the Rings, where like it's inherently an unfair comparison, but it's also not,
Hmm.
because like especially when you know that realistically, if you want to be real, Game of Thrones wouldn't exist without Lord of the Rings.
Sure.
Like George R. R. Martin, I can guarantee you would not have came up with this exact same story had Tolkien not written Lord of the Rings. Like
Hmm.
Lord of the Rings was like the framework for our modern high fantasy. So the comparison rightfully in a lot of ways should be there, even as unfairly or fairly as it should be, because it was the same. If Lord of the Rings came out and it was 10 times better than Game of Thrones, people would be having the same conversation just in reverse, you
Sure.
know? And like, but in the end, I don't know. I feel like it's an unfair comparison just because like fundamentally they're different, but at the same time, they're so uniquely intertwined that like the comparison, whether they were cycling through their releases or they're running concurrently, I honestly think best case scenario would be for them to have it running concurrently just because they could feed off the hype. Like, since people are so into House of the Dragon, it would make them want to watch another show like that.
I
What
can see that. I
because if the show was shit and it was the only thing on, they just wouldn't watch it.
Yeah.
But
I
now they
think
could come back to it.
I think it might be a case of differing for different people. I personally think I would enjoy the Lord of the Rings show more, if I wasn't so tends to mute emotions and feelings, for me, especially. And so like we were just talking about Breaking Bad. Breaking Bad, I remember how much I loved Breaking Bad. I remember how just mind-blowing I thought that show was and how incredible I thought virtually every episode was. And when I go back and watch it, I'm again taken right back to those same feelings and emotions. But, I haven't seen Breaking Bad in probably a couple years at this point, and I'm not as hyped and as excited and as invested in that story as I am when I'm in it, when I'm currently watching it. So even a few months later, I feel how good Game of Thrones is right now, and how good House of Dragons is. Like we got done watching this episode, and I can't stop talking about how good it is. Um, and so I think I would be better served having a break and having Lord of the Rings, having Rings of Power be a few months after the end of House of Dragon, just so I'm not as conscious of how good a high fantasy show could be. And then I think I would enjoy it just a little bit more because I wouldn't be making those I would make those comparisons. Eventually, I'm sure I would go back and say, "Oh yeah, they did a real good job." The emotional aspect of it wouldn't be as intense, I think, and would help serve Rings of Power for me at least a little more.
I feel like I think that's valid. I think you would have more room to breathe and more time to reflect. I think the comparisons would be less if they weren't running concurrently, you wouldn't have people immediately going well, this wasn't as good as House of the Dragon. Like, well, if it was running by itself, you probably wouldn't get that, but I think inherently, in the back of people's minds, they would still think that. Like it might not be the topic of discussion, but I think it would still happen. That's why I think, it's probably best for them to feed off the hype. Because even
Yeah,
George
no,
R.
that's a perfect rationale for it.
Yeah, because
And
even George said, the same when he was asked, because he got asked the same question, "What do you think about, Rings of Power? Is it gonna be running at the same time as, your show, House of the Dragon?" And he said the same thing I said, ironically. It's just, he just wants it to be good because then, we all win, which is the
yeah,
same thing Kevin Feige says about DC. Whenever he gets asked about DC, it's just "Dude, I want DC movies to be good because if DC movies are bad, people lose interest in it. It just
yeah,
they're inherently they're compared and contrasted no matter what. So if they're doing good, that means people are interested in those kind of movies. The minute a comic book movie is they just suck and everyone doesn't like it, they're gonna start thinking that all comic book movies are like that. That's just
yeah,
how we work, as a society. It's just comic book movie bad was flip on people's head because they just went and saw all these DC movies or all these Marvel movies and they're just bad. So then they just lose interest in it. But if Lord of the Rings is the greatest thing since sliced bread and House of the Dragon's good, then everyone's gonna be into it and vice versa,
sure,
you know?
yeah.
So I think they probably hedged their honestly, it makes me kind of worried though. Now that I'm thinking about it, because maybe they knew the show wasn't that good and knew that their best bet was to run it alongside the House of Dragon.
Yeah, there's also a part of me that believes I honestly believe that maybe I'm misjudging the guy. I hardly know anything about him, but there's part of me that wonders if Jeff Bezos, his ego wasn't in this, and oh, they think I can do a show. I'm the richest guy in the world. Watch this. I'm gonna, I don't know.
Eh, I wonder how much because money aside, I really I don't follow what Jeff Bezos does, but the fact that they were able to get as much money as they got poured into this, you have to imagine Jeff Bezos had to okay that. So he
Oh,
had
sure.
some inkling of getting this show made, no doubt. But
Well, and he's been all over. Like I've seen the quote multiple times just over the past few days, where he apparently the quote that they're attributing to him, or at least to his son, is that when he told his son that he was thinking about doing it, his son said, "Oh, don't f it up, don't fuck it up." So um, he's been front and center with the release of it and everything. So kind of assumed and that may be just me unfairly, biasly thinking that a guy that has billions of dollars and is either at any given moment the richest guy in the world just would have an ego the size of whatever and would want to say like, oh yeah, how Game of Thrones, yeah, really popular. Well, guess what? I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it better.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. We'll see. If you like this clip and want to be a part of the conversation, come back and join us for our live House of the Dragon after shows every Sunday around 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time and 7:30 p.m. Pacific Time, immediately following the premiere of each episode on HBO Max. We're also doing live after shows and Q&As every Friday around 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time with a 6:30 p.m. Pacific Time for She-Hulk, Lord of the Rings of Power, and we'll also be doing one for the Star Wars prequel series Andor when that comes out later this month. So if you like those shows, be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you'll get notified every time that we go live. And we'll look forward to seeing you in the chat and answering your questions in our next video or live stream. Thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to like the video and let us know your thoughts down in the comment section below, and we'll see you in the next one. Like and subscribe.